Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper, and I am very excited and honored to have Echo VanderWal, the founder of the Loot Commission, also known as TLC, on the Lead with Heart podcast. Echo is a graduate of Cedarville University and has led TLC to scale compassion in a way that many deemed impossible. TLC's mission is to provide free, compassionate, and comprehensive healthcare to underserved populations in Eswatini and has transformed the lives of thousands. Today, TLC serves 1/3 of the nation, all without any cost to the patients. Well, welcome to the podcast, Echo.
Thank you, Haley.
Well, I would love to know a little bit more about your background. Why did you choose Eswatini, and what led you to this mission today?
Thanks a lot. Actually, when I was a young child, I was 8 years old, I felt called to work overseas in healthcare, and specifically in Africa. I had heard about some people that were working here and heard about the medical need and felt that's what I was supposed to do with my life. And then when my husband was 17, he had a similar calling. We met when we were 19, got married when we were 21. He went through medical school, graduated, and went to residency in internal medicine and pediatrics. And I studied to be a PA with a background in surgery and pediatrics. Then we graduated, finished his residency program, and were introduced to the country of Eswatini, at the time Swaziland. We were able to travel to Swaziland for the first time in 2004. And when we came to Eswatini, we found that we had dropped really into the middle of the worst of the HIV pandemic. When we were picked up from the airport, we were taken out to a rural area. When we went to that community, we found people in their houses dying everywhere, young people in their 20s and 30s. And we started asking why people were not accessing healthcare. And there were two main barriers that we heard. One was it was very expensive to board public transport and go to facilities. And we figured out fairly rapidly that people were choosing between going to the hospital or feeding their kids. Obviously, we all know as parents what our choice is when that happens. And the other barrier that we heard is that many patients told us that when they went to health facilities, they felt stigmatized. And some of them even said, if I have to be treated like that, let me go home and die. And that's what people were doing when they felt like they were not being treated with compassion. And so we realized early on that compassion was going to be the bridge that we had to build in order to serve in rural communities in Eswatini.
Wow, that's beautiful that you saw that need and that really the suffering of the people and really wanted to meet that need and move there. And I have a similar experience of working in Malawi, Africa. And particularly, I was providing a ready-to-use therapeutic food for children. We actually were serving women and children with HIV. And when we went into the villages, we saw that women were excommunicated if they had HIV, weren't allowed to take medicine. And there's so much proof of if a woman takes medicine and is pregnant, there's almost 0% transmission to the child. And so our role was also to take out healthcare workers and educate the community on HIV. So I would love to know some of the stigmas that you came across when it comes to HIV.
Well, definitely, there's a similar scenario in Eswatini, especially in rural communities at the time. Really, cell phones were not prevalent. And so people were very isolated from information or education about HIV. And particularly, we saw that people felt at that time, if they touched each other, that they would get HIV. So there were transmission myths. And so we did a lot of work in education initially. I do think it helped because we served as a family. So we had 4 children at the time. We had triplets that were 4 and a 1-year-old boy, all boys. We have 2 more, but they came much later. And we used to move with the 4 boys into communities. And I really feel that helped build bridges and send messaging that if we were okay with basically living amongst people who could be infected with HIV, that probably the transmission was not as they might fear. And so we did a lot of what I would just say boots on the ground, shoulder to shoulder type of work in communities where we journeyed with the communities. And definitely over time, much of that stigma fell away. But you're absolutely accurate that the stigma affects the women and the children the most.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for giving that explanation. You said that your first role was really to see this act of compassion in the community. So how do you define compassion with yourself and with your organization?
Well, fairly early on, we started living by a motto that we even hold fast to today, which is to treat every last one as your father, mother, brother, sister, or child. And we all want our family members or ourselves to be treated with compassion. And we found that over the years, if we can filter all of our decisions through that filter, that it really helps us to make much better decisions than we would make based on how do you feel today or how tired you are or how difficult are things. But if you're taking care of your family member, it changes your manner of approach for sure. That even bled over to COVID. And during COVID was a very difficult time for our country. We actually had no local production of oxygen at the time. And so when South Africa didn't have enough oxygen, obviously we also did not have enough oxygen. It wasn't being exported to us. And in the second wave, we had the highest case fatality rates of any country in the world. And we lost so many people really unnecessarily just because we didn't have a way to produce our own oxygen. A lot of the other hospitals were not accepting patients because they didn't have what they needed. And we had to make a decision. Are we going to take the people even though we don't have the one thing they need? Or are we going to turn them away because we don't have what they need? And the decision really went back to that line that I just said. If it's your mom, will you turn her away, even if you don't have what she needs? No, we all love our family, even if we don't have what they need. So this has really helped to guide us in some of the most difficult of times.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. And I love that you really live it in and out in everything that you do. So he has grown to serve 1/3 of the Eswatini's population, providing those free healthcare services that, as in your bio, said that many thought were impossible to offer on such a scale. So can you share the key milestones and challenges you've encountered in scaling TLC to this level?
Initially, it was an emergency. It was a medical emergency. It's like being in an emergency department for many years in a row. And then at some stage, we realized that many of the people that were working for us actually had experienced intense trauma and grief during the worst of the HIV pandemic. Most of them were children during the worst of the HIV pandemic. And when we started really understanding how much unprocessed grief and trauma there was in our own staff, we realized that it was very important that we create a space for inner healing, for processing trauma and grief. And I would say this particular part of what we've done has been the most transformative for our organization because we started an onboarding program called Base Camp, and it is basically the first 10 weeks that people are employed. They are able to go to class and do leadership development classes, personal development classes, work open opportunities to process grief and trauma, and just recognizing that the majority of the people that work for us were orphaned during the worst of the HIV pandemic. It really took us a step back to say, how are we going to now invest in the future of the nation through rebuilding so much that was lost. We had 20% of our nation was orphaned due to HIV. And so obviously there was a huge rebuilding process that needed to happen. And for us as an organization, setting that time aside to make sure that the staff were well equipped and had the time for themselves before we asked them to go heal other people. Because as we all know, it's hard to heal if you're wounded. We typically wound when we're wounded. And this really changed our whole organization. In fact, the resilience, we started about 7 years ago, and about almost 1,500 people have gone through the program, and it has just been totally transformative. And it has really helped us to be able to move through very difficult periods. As I mentioned, during COVID, we ended up admitting 90% of our COVID ICU cases for the whole entire country. Additionally to that, during COVID, we had an outbreak of unprecedented civil unrest. And there have been a lot of challenges in the past 5 years or so, but the resilience that the team has responded to those challenges, I really think goes back to that time that's set aside to allow people to process the trauma and grief that they've experienced at different periods in their life. So I believe that was the only reason that we could scale compassion. If we wouldn't have taken that step back to create space for people to actually take care of themselves, then it would have been very difficult to scale compassion and respond to the needs of the nation.
Wow, I just want to double tap on that because I think what you said is so important. These people are in the community. They've experienced grief and trauma, and showing up to then help other people can be really hard. And I think that human-centered approach, like you said, is what led you to scale because you took care of the whole person first before you led them to go take care of the community. And so can you talk a little bit more about like the intricacies of base camp and like what that onboarding process looks like? Because I think a lot of, especially like when I've worked in a lot of organizations that serve people experiencing homelessness, hunger, domestic violence, and things like that. And there is really no space for people to process trauma or process that grief that you experience when you hear these stories of desperation. And so how do you prepare people and then continue to help people process that trauma and grief that they experience every day in their workspace?
I think maybe a little bit of background. We are 97% local staff. So the majority of the people that work for TLC are Eswatini, Indigenous Eswatini citizens. And what has been most impactful from my standpoint is when people that have gone through the healing process can then share their healing process in a transparent way with people who are just coming in, because then it neutralizes so many things that might be there to actually sharing. I remember when I first realized that this was so critical, I realized at some point that because so many people's parents had died, they didn't have a place to belong. So my husband and I started opening up our home to staff coming over. Of course, we had always done that, but we had moved during that period to a house that was bigger. So we started having bigger like staff gatherings there. And I remember hearing this, it started that people started to share their stories in the setting of the home setting. And I remember one young lady who still serves on our team, actually in a leadership position, but I remember her just sharing how traumatized she was that when she was 6 years old, her dad, who she was very close to, was dying, and all she wanted to do was go say goodbye to him. And there was a family member an aunt that refused to let her go inside and say bye. And it was just interesting because she wasn't as traumatized about losing her dad as she was that she wasn't able to say goodbye, and then felt anger towards the aunt in this situation because she didn't allow her to go inside. Of course, the aunt thought she was doing the best thing for her, but it was the thing that had really traumatized her. And when she told that story, and it was very emotional, she was not an emotional person, but when she was telling the story, she was very emotional. I just saw like all this weight falling off of her. And I realized that people just need a place to talk through the challenges that they've gone through. And it's not so much about what we do or say, but making a space where it's safe to process the pain of life. And not that there's not more pain that comes, but I do feel that once you realize that it is safe to process trauma and grief, it is safe to process things that have happened to you that are not good at all, that it becomes easier to do that the next time you feel traumatized or the next time you're going through grief. And so we started doing this. It was a little bit by chance, a little bit not by chance, but we started actually this program, and our staff immediately said, "You have no idea what this means to us." They wanted to add more people to the classes. And I started, wow, it's just amazing how much like they have this desire, this craving for this space. And it's not that we don't think it's as much about the curriculum as it is about an intentional process. There's several things that we've done that I think have helped. We don't have one facilitator. We have about 40 facilitators. So we rotate senior leadership through. So people don't form a relationship with one person, but then they start to trust a team because they've interacted with many people by the time they go to the workstations. And at some point during the course of these 10 weeks, there are processes for them to identify if they're angry at someone, a parent or an adult or family member. Obviously, we have a tremendous amount of abuse issues of people who are orphaned and put in maybe settings that were not that safe for them. So there's a lot of things that they need to work through, and anger that they have towards certain people. And we give them space to work through that. And I just find that if people can talk, if people can process, and if people feel like they're in a place they belong, that I always tell the team that the sky's the limit. We want you to feel like you can soar and do anything that you want to do in your life. And we don't want you to be limited by anything that's happened in the past. So I actually only teach one session in this whole process. And really, it is just a team effort. And it's just been amazing, really amazing.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I love that you really focus not just on the curriculum, but creating that safe space, because that's what people need. And like you said, like on the Maslow hierarchy of needs, we need to feel like we belong. We need to feel like we have significance above food, shelter, and water, which are our most basic needs. And so creating that, like you said, allows that innovation, allows that teamwork, allows people to be resilient together through any challenge that they face, because they feel like they can voice how they feel or their fears and their needs. And so I think that's really beautiful that you have created that space. And if a nonprofit a professional is listening to this, which is all nonprofit professionals, and they want to create that space within their own organization, what's like a first step that you would recommend for them to take to create that safe space within their organization?
Well, it is a commitment. We do pay salaries during that time, so you do have to be committed to it. In fact, during COVID, we did not have enough doctors in our organization. We had so many patients that we actually, for the first time ever, and probably for the last time ever, organizationally chartered a flight from Zimbabwe and flew in a whole airplane of doctors to work with us. And I remember that when they came, it was like the height of COVID. We really needed medical staff, and they went to base camp. That's how important it was for us to be committed to the process. And I remember there's several of us that work in administration that don't really do clinical care anymore. And we all went back to the hospital during COVID. And I remember they used to walk by when they would go home at night, walk by the hospital, and we would wave, they would wave. And the first thing that we did is we redid our core values and our core qualities of our organization. So just coming up with very simple things that were critical to what we believe we were called to. So there was like a restructuring at that time that allowed us to be able to really push into a space that was important for us. But I think for us, it was just about taking the first step. And then as you saw how the staff reacted, then you could create the next step. It was almost impossible to know what the response was going to be from the staff because it was so new, it was so different, and it was just something that we had never done before and I had not seen done before. But I think it's just taking the first step and not feeling like you have to have everything worked out, but recognizing that taking the first step will lead the way to the step after that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Sometimes it's getting started or taking that first step is the hardest part of any initiative, right? Sending that first email or whatever, just inviting people to this space is the hardest thing. And then once people get there, you see that sense of community, you see that sense of belonging, and then it empowers you to want to continue moving forward and build on it. And you mentioned you reevaluated your core values and qualities. And I want to learn more about that because I've always heard of like core values, mission, and vision. But I've never really heard about this idea of core qualities. So what sparked you to reimagine what your organization looked like in terms of these values and qualities? And can you explain a little bit more about what they are?
Sure. One thing that we recognize is that because so many people grew up without parents, we had a gap in character development for a whole generation. And of course, because it's a medical environment, we also do a lot of tech work. So we have engineers and developers and coders and people that have to have professional degrees to do what they do. But we realized that we were elevating competence over other critical core qualities. And so I say we turned everything on its head, and calling is really number one. When you're working with people in stressful situations, if you don't feel called to that work, it is very easy to get burnout. It is very easy to just want to give up. It's very easy to blame other people for things that happen day in and day out. And so we really feel that being called to a life of compassion and working with people who are ill is important. We put character number 2. And one of the reasons that we did that is because we recognized that we would be training leaders and then they would have something happen with their character that would actually undermine their competence. In fact, one very brilliant guy that worked in our organization, he still works for us, but I remember very clearly about a decade ago, he said that my competence took me where my character couldn't protect me. That will never leave me for the rest of my life, because I realized that when we are working with leaders to grow them, we need to make sure that we capacitate them with critical qualities of leadership. And of course, character is very important because people don't trust leaders that don't have integrity. And so these things can really undermine your growth process if you're not careful. So character is number 2. Number 3 is culture. Of course, we have our own trade culture organizationally, but we're also committed to honoring the culture that we serve in Eswatini. And number 4 is chemistry, because we also realized if you really enjoy the people we work next to, work is so much easier and the days go by so much faster. And when the team is unified, it just helps a lot. And then number 5 is competence. So we call them our 5 C's. They got reordered, probably very shockingly to all of us at the beginning, that competence was last. It doesn't mean that competence isn't important. It just means it needs to be in submission to the other 4 qualities. So that's our core qualities. As far as what we call our DNA, it's our core values. Number 1, the first one is teachability. And it's mostly recognizing a spirit of humility where no matter where you are in the organizational structure, you can learn from anyone. We are very interested in hearing what our gardeners think, what our security guards think. From every level of the organization, we want their feedback. I can tell you things are happening in our organization, very important things today, because we heard from people at every level in the organization. And that's teachability. 2 is looks for solutions, just recognizing that there are solutions to every challenge, because sometimes you can feel like they're not, but recognizing that there is. And the C, TLC DNA, the C is committed to unity, really focusing on when we're united, we can do exponentially more than when we're not. The D is dedicated to every last one. It means that we actually don't leave a clinical site ever, and we haven't for 20 years, until every person is taken care of. Because if they have sat in that line the whole day, then we need to make sure that they receive care before they leave. And not about me, servanthood, recognizing that we're not number 1 in the equation, that people that we're serving, we call them VIPs, very important patients, they're number 1. And A is an attitude of gratefulness. We have one person that serves on our staff development team, and he says, have you ever seen someone who's grateful and expressing that gratitude that's not smiling? And so the toughest of days, we are intentional about saying 3 things we're grateful for, because it does change your outlook. So, and it also, the gratitude for us was very important in working in a resource limited setting, because it's very easy to see what you don't have and lose sight of what you do have. So that was the process that we went through. It was not really that difficult. It was just something that we sat together and we started talking through. What are the important things to us? What do we think is the secret sauce? What do we think is why we do what we do? And then the team was able to put those things together. And we actually recite them every morning in our different divisions. So we have 45 divisions in the organization. And in every division in the morning, they recite those, as well as our creed and some other things. It sounds maybe a little bit elementary, but it's interesting how much it's united the team. And when you're onboarding new people, it also brings us all together around our goals and objectives as an organization.
Yeah, I love how you outlined that. And I think it's so important to keep it at the forefront of everything you do and every decision that you make. Because, like you said, it makes that united front. Whether there's hardship within the organization or challenges, everyone in the organization is able to remember those core values and be humble enough to approach it in that fashion. So I really like how you laid that out. Looking ahead, what are your aspirations for TLC and the broader impact you hope to achieve in Eswatini and beyond? Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs. Helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more.
So when you ask about that, over the years, we've built this big digital system, like this digital ecosystem. And it has enforced accountability and transparency in what you would understand as an environment where it's hard to do that. So we've worked on a lot of innovations and like so many things, telehealth hubs, drones. This team does like amazing work. I'm not really involved in the day-to-day at all. They just have amazing vision and they grind it out until they make it work. But our dream and aspiration is that the budget that is there for healthcare would actually get to the people. And we crack the corruption code that happens in Africa in general, because I just am convinced after 20 years here that it is not that we don't have enough resources. In fact, we don't need more resources in Africa, but we need to be accountable and transparent about the resources we do have. And the reason so many people are coming to our institution is because we always have drugs. Why? Because we have a robust and accountable supply chain system.
I can relate to when I was in Malawi and you go to the city, to these healthcare centers, and they'd be stocked full of drugs, but then we're at this rural hospital where people are going to die and they don't have the healthcare services, but they're all in the capital. But somehow there's that distribution chain misgap that it's not getting to the people that need it the most. It's being stuck because there's no transportation or whatever. So I saw that working with the healthcare system and how frustrating and challenging it is because there's more to it than just transport and getting it to the people. If that was the easy solution, heck, pay for all the trucks in the world. But that's not the simple solution. So yeah, I can understand.
Unfortunately, those vehicles are carrying people's groceries and refrigerators, and people are dying. And because of everything that happened and how many ICU patients we ended up getting asked all over the world to speak about what happened during COVID. What's interesting is, and there was quite the story to tell from a technical and like operational standpoint, but all anybody wanted to know about was, how did you get the staff to work like that? And I think that really was the proof in the pudding of the base camp process, because when things got tough, there was so much reserve that people had because of this inner healing process. But you don't have to ask me that, but I'm just following up on that. You can ask me any other question.
So I'm really interested because you made that one of your core values. I do this work all the time because I'm certified in this process called EMC leadership. Dr. Lola Gershfeld has been on the podcast. I talk about it as a guest and in the work that I do, because conflict happens in the workplace, whether we like it or not. And we talk about how conflict is neither about content, it's about emotional disconnection. It's about, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard. And sometimes you might not like the person that you're working with. And so how do you help train? Obviously, Dr. Lola Gershfeld has her own course on how we are trained to navigate conflict in the workplace. And specifically as a facilitator, I help move conversations forward, help people feel seen and heard so that they can have more productive conversations, because I've been in conversations where people are talking in circles and it's not getting anywhere, and it can be quite frustrating. So how do you, through this chemistry aspect, help people navigate conflict in the workplace?
No, thanks a lot for that question, because it is very relevant, especially when many people were orphaned, didn't have their parents when they were growing up. Of course, when you have parents and they see you're not okay, then you talk through things. And that's part of where we learn how to resolve conflict. But when you don't have that safe place, definitely people stuff a lot and they don't feel safe to work through conflict. So that we recognized, I was very disturbed by the fact that we would have people that were really excelling, really doing well, really growing. And then one day they just wouldn't come to work, and you would ask what happened, and you will find out they just had the smallest conflict with a colleague and they didn't know how to talk through it, didn't know where to escalate. And so they would just eject. So we did realize how critical it was. And this is part of the base camp training, along with some very other critical trainings that we do. But we have committed to something called a triple C. It's a crucial care conversation. It means that when we see someone's not okay, we're very proactive to say, you don't look okay today. Is there anything bothering you? And we do this very proactively. So we try not to let things get advanced. And just making people recognize that when we have these conversations, it is because we care about each other and we want to have a healthy relationship. And I think that's very opposite to where sometimes people feel intimidated or threatened at work, like somebody's trying to get rid of them. No, we have these conversations so we can stay together and so we can have healthy relationships together. So that has been a very simple, let's say, intervention that has worked really well for us organizationally. And again, making people feel safe when those conversations occur is really critical. We also have, because we have a quiet and a shy culture, created multiple mediums where people can express themselves. We found that people were much more willing to write at times than talk. And so we have developed in the digital system that we use to manage our operations, the feedback loops, so that we can hear from people so they can throw a red flag early and let us know that they're not okay. And then that opens the door then for us to be proactive, to seek them out so that you can talk through what the challenges are. It's worked well. I won't say, of course, we're 700 people. It's not perfect. We do have conflict every day, but recognizing we're going to have conflict and we need healthy ways to process it has been very important. And I think it's played a huge role in the chemistry of the team working well together. I can tell you that between the second and third wave of COVID, we have a construction team and they built the shell of our oxygen plant in 52 days. But you don't do those things without this intense unity in the team. And so because at times we have to respond in crisis and disaster, that unity has really helped us to be able to do things that otherwise I don't think we would have ever been able to do.
Yeah, I think that's such an important part and perspective on how you navigate conflict, because when we get lost from each other, when we get disconnected, we feel like we're not important to each other. We forget that we're really here with a common cause. And so being able to navigate those conversations and remind people how important they are to each other and how important they are to the mission, and that, hey, we're on the same team. We're trying to do the same thing. Maybe we got lost here along the way, but let's connect together. And like you said, your team was able to build a facility in 52 days, which is probably nearly impossible, but you become better problem solvers. You become more collaborative. You communicate better when you are able to catch yourself in that negative cycle and build on that positive cycle of engagement.
Yes.
So if people want to learn more about the Luke Commission, where can they find you and the work that you do?
Well, thank you. You can find us on the web at lukecommission.org or write us at info@lukecommission.org. It's been really great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will be making sure to link that all in the show notes, and I really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you very much, Haley. Have a great day.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.